Hey everyone, welcome back to Rhythm Railroad. This is part 10 of my grain facility update. The grain facility scene is coming along nicely, and I've been able to expand the scenery further along here. This is the newest area I've been working on here. And this has kind of stayed status quo for now, but I did get a little bit of connection from scene to scene done, and a little bit over on the other side as well. So, as this coal train struggles to get this giant string of empty cars all the way up the hill here, I just really like the way this looks here. It's really starting to look nice. And I think once I get that photo backdrop in place, it's going to look even better. The photo backdrop, which I'm looking for right now, if anybody knows of anything similar to what I'm about to describe, I'm looking for something that has either like a huge field and then like a small hint of like trees in the back or mountains, or something where there's like farm type structures, but I want them to look small so they look like they're far away. So in other words, I'm trying to pull the scene back as far as I can with that photo backdrop. And the other option would be to make it look like a river, where like it's, this is supposed to be Albany, so I figure make it look like the Hudson or something, where there's a very wide sense of water there, and then on the other side like maybe some tree lines or mountains or homes or whatever it is on the other side, buildings, from the city. But so that's in the works. I'm trying to figure that out. But back to this thing. So basically what I did is I was able to complete this part, which I think it might have been on my last update, with the plaster and the foam and stuff like that, just to create that almost like a man-made hill there. Again, I didn't want to make that rough looking like the stuff in the back, which is just natural, hills. And then obviously I made the wall, and in the wall, well, let me just explain. Behind the wall is basically just a piece of masonite board that's anchored in, and all of this area here is filled in with pink foam. So I anchored in the masonite, which is one long strip, to a couple of pieces of wood that I had from the spline kind of sticking out like that. So, because obviously it wasn't going to hold with the foam, which is the pink foam. And then I kind of like butted it up against this Walther's abutment kit, which I had in place since the beginning. And then once all that was in place, I put like a semi-thick layer of plaster. I wanted it thick once again, just like before when I made that concrete wall, because especially now I wanted to create that sense of like where the seams are for the blocks, or the joint sections. I wanted them to look very deep, so I did that. Now it's a total mess right now because I'm waiting for it to dry. What I like to do with this kind of stuff, see, like right there, all that stuff is sticking out. I'm going to be sanding all that stuff down. But what I like to do when I make these is that I like to wait for a little bit for the joint compound to kind of start drying, and then when it's like a little rubbery, that's when I go in and start carving. And I basically carve it with just a regular like eyeglass flathead, like a mini flathead like this, because it's got enough of an edge to create the lines, but it's also got the thickness. Unlike an X-Acto blade, it's too thin, so I think it just looks a little too narrow. Plus, when you start sanding, you start to get some of that stuff back in the groove again. So I wanted to leave a larger gap than possible. So when it's gummy like that, it's easier to do rather than waiting until it dries completely, and then you're like really muscling, trying to get in there and trying to really scrape at it. And a lot of times you slip, and then you get like a line that that creates like a curve, and you start ruining your own work that way. So that's why I like to do it when it's semi-soft. The only problem with that is that as you're carving, for example, when I start carving this way, since it's such a long line, I'm basically going from here all the way through, you have to keep wiping the blade off with the material that you're removing often, because what happens is as you start doing it, it starts to accumulate here at the front of the blade, and then that little clump of plaster starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's kind of like a snowball effect, and then before you know it, you're creating a gap that's like, you know, ridiculously wide. So you don't want to do that. You want to just get a little off, wipe it off on a paper towel, which is what I have here. Then go back in carefully without messing up your line. A little more, wipe it off a little more, and so on and so forth until you get all the way through. So this was a little tedious to make because obviously I had to make what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 basically horizontal lines, and then go back in and very carefully get in between. The way I did it was I started with the bottom row, since I figured that's the most of the mistakes that are going to happen if I make them on the bottom row doesn't matter, because a lot of that stuff's going to be covered anyway with ground cover. So I went in and basically used this as a template. I figured blocks would be, like large blocks would be about that wide. So, you know, I made the first one, then I shifted it over. You know, went in with the screwdriver, and did that, then I shifted it over. Right? So just to kind of keep things consistent. They don't have to be perfect by any means. I mean, if you look at some of these walls, if you Google search large concrete block retaining walls, you'll see that not all of them are perfect. Some of them are. Some of them are very straight, but I'm going for that older look. You know, it's going to be weathered beyond belief. It's going to be really old looking. So that's how I do that. And then obviously I don't want to sand it until it's completely dry, like rock hard. Because if you start trying to wipe off all this extra stuff while it's still wet, you start mushing messing up the blocks that are in place, right? And as soon as you get a little bit of pressure in there, the lines go like that and everything gets really out of whack. So I don't recommend doing that. I'm going to probably insert a little video on how I do it. I recorded myself kind of making the lines, so you get a sense of you know, how to do that. Anyway, so yeah, once I got that done, I went back with a little popsicle stick, something small, and I just created that connection there. Now, obviously, when I paint it, it's going to look a lot better, but I tried to do it without getting too much plaster onto this plastic, because this is already weathered and painted. So, you know, trying to keep it as neat as possible. I did get a little bit of schmutz, as people would say, as I was, you know, creating the ground cover and stuff, but that stuff comes right off with your nail or with a little piece of, you know, paper towel, a little wet paper towel. Don't do it too much, because you'll obviously remove whatever you've done there already. So, okay, so then I took, once this was all covered in plaster, I used the same joint compound to make this. Then I took another set of foam, you know, pink foam insulation sheets, like smaller, and I kind of put them at an angle on the other side of the spline. And I made them a little bit, you know, thick. I didn't want to do like a very thin layer, because I wanted to attach them to any thick, you know, styrofoam that's on the other side. So, you know, basically from this point on, it's all like 2-inch, you know, stacked up, and like some of it is like 1.5 inches. And I just kind of built it up randomly. There's gaps under there. I don't know if I can get under here and show you, but let's see. Yeah, you kind of see it's kind of stacked all over the place. So no worries about, you know, getting it perfectly curved and foam everywhere. The only layer that really counts is kind of like the top ones, where you're potentially going to stick trees and things like that, because then you don't want like holes where you put a tree through and it goes right through. That's the thing I'm struggling with on this side a little bit, which I knew was going to happen, because I made this with the metal mesh and then the plaster cloth. The only good thing is that I put enough plaster cloth, like back there and stuff. I did like 3 layers of plaster cloth on top of the metal, but you know, it's not as stable as like a solid piece of foam under there. So when you stick a tree through it, it tends to kind of wiggle a little bit. So sometimes I got to put a little glue and kind of hold it in place until it stays still, or brace it with other trees, or brace it with other things, and then it's fine. But it's definitely easier when you have foam underneath. So that's what I did there. Then obviously, once I was done with that, I started to create the shape, and the way I did that was with all these paper towels that I was using to wipe my hands with. I just kind of shoved them in there with a little water, just to kind of keep them in place. Otherwise, they like expand. if they're not wet. So I did that, and I tried to create a irregular kind of contour, because I didn't want it to be, when you put pink foam down, it's perfectly flat, right? So what I did is I made one layer closer to here, the next layer up, obviously more shallow, and then the next one more shallow. But I didn't go, like, there's no foam up there and there's no foam up here. I didn't go too high because I knew I was going to build it up with the paper towels eventually. And the paper towels also hold the trees nicely. So, when you make a hole, even though it's a little mushier than that, at least it grabs the whatever is under your tree. So yeah, so once I was done with the pink foam, I tried to, kind of insert different lumps of paper towel and then go over it with plastic cloth. You don't have to go very thick, because with this stuff, you're going to put plaster over it anyway, or in this case, Sculpting, which is what I use to create the texture here. So, Sculpting got like paper in it, basically, shredded paper and stuff like that. And that's why it gets very lumpy. With the Sculpting, I've been kind of like, I'm basically new at working with Sculpting. I've only started using it with this layout. But what I have noticed is that when you first lay it down, it's very, very rough looking like that. And if that's what you want, then great. But what I like to do is smooth it out. In fact, I have to smooth that out a little bit. Once it starts to get a little drier, which doesn't take long, by the way, just go over it with your hand like this, and then it just smooths it out a little bit, because you don't want, the whole thing to look like jagged rocks, throughout. And if it dries completely, like this has been sitting there for a while, I just go back with a little water on top, just kind of wet it again, and then just kind of work it in, and it smooths it out. But I think it's just a nicer looking effect than having the whole thing sticking out, like I said before, like in a very rough look. So then once I was done with all that, then I extended here. I mean, I did the foam before I did the plaster and all that stuff, obviously, but I kind of gave this a basic shape on the way down, and I wanted it to look all kind of like different angles, and I wanted this to kind of feel like it was sloping this way at the same time. So that's what I pretty much achieved. I brought it down this way, and then I brought it under the bridge. This part, I love how this came out, right? So that it's on an angle with the abutment, it's not straight. I just feel like, a lot of times when you see layouts that everything is straight and everything's perfect, then it looks fake. Then it looks like, why would that be perfectly straight on both sides with the exact same height and everything? And I was kind of getting there. I was starting to do that, because it's the nature of the beast, right? You're creating everything in layers, so the tendency is to make everything exactly the same height. So yeah, the fact that this was the same height as that side, I was a little bit upset about that. So I kind of masked it by bringing this hill up higher than over there. So at least it looks irregular. Like when you take a look at the picture like this, you're like, oh, this is much lower than this, right? And it all kind of blends in. So that's how I plan this stuff. I just try to see what the general picture's going to be at the end, and make it look natural by not forcing straight edges everywhere. So the idea here is that the river is going to obviously be very wide, or it's probably going to be flowing the other way. So it's going to start very narrow from back there, where that picture is, which, by the way, I have to figure out how to do that so that it blends in. And then it kind of comes behind the hill here and opens up into the main river, right? The reason I kind of bent it over to the side was because I wanted to mask it. I wanted to kind of make it disappear. So I'll be putting trees here, like nice big trees right under the bridge here, and kind of around and work them up, so that you can't see in there, right? Even if you try to look, I mean, I guess you could, but you have to really force yourself to look in there. But when you look at it like this, it'll look like the river is just kind of, disappearing in the background there. At least that's the plan. Let's see how it comes out. This side, the idea is that the road kind of goes that way also, kind of like, a lot of roads that follow river lines are kind of parallel to them, obviously. So this is the idea that it's going to go that way. So I'm going to be putting trees right here, nice tall trees to kind of create a canopy and let it kind of disappear. Plus the bridge is like a seam block anyway, so you know it's kind of lets it do that naturally. And I'll be putting more hills and trees on this side as well. So in the back here, I'm gonna just build a false kind of like small hill. Just kind of, it's not, I don't have a lot of room to work with, so it's just gonna kind of continue up to about here, and then I'll probably put trees just to give it a little height. But you know, I do want it to look like it's sloping down toward the river here, so you know, I can't go too high. So yeah, so that's basically done, and I really love how this looks from down here. So I can take some good shots from down here too if I want to get the, you know, get the train as it goes over the bridge. Sorry about my camera work, it really sucks right now. So, oh, the other thing I did is I had a few extra rock molds, or rocks that I made from the castings. And so I gave it a little bit of a hint of rock being under there, because all of this is going to be covered in heavy, you know, ground cover. It's not going to look as smooth as like this here. It's going to be a lot more bushes and tall grass and like trees and thick shrubs, you know, whatever I can do to lift it a lot. And then the rocks are just going to peek through here and there to give a hint of like there being more rock under there somewhere. It's just obviously with dirt over them. And yeah, so the idea is that over here I'm not going to put a photo backdrop. I'm just going to create a lot of trees. And then as it comes down this way, then that's where I have to create a seam between the photo backdrop and the trees. So I guess I have to get the photo backdrop behind this a little bit, or at least extend this a little bit in front of the photo backdrop with trees and stuff. So that then as the tree line opens, you see the backdrop, the photo backdrop. And then obviously when it gets to this side, same concept, except over here I'm going to block it with buildings instead. It's going to be like probably like a tall structure here. And it'll be more buildings, like more factory type buildings here, or maybe just one large one like that. Trying to figure that out still. So, but I think eventually, I mean, now I feel like I'm over the hill here. Like now I can see the scene come together, or coming together, and I can kind of say, okay, now I'm going to really put some art into it and try to really get creative with how I'm approaching this. So, but at least I feel like the initial template, or like the skeleton of the scene is now in place. Now it's a matter of details, and you know that's the fun for me. That's the fun part. I hate like the first part where I'm like trying to figure things out. That drives me crazy. It gives me anxiety because I'm afraid that I'm gonna do something and I gotta rip it out and then I gotta put it back in. You know, it's just all that. So I'm glad all that stuff's out of the way now. Everything is functioning. Everything is in place now as far as track work and, you know, all the electrical things and whatever, the feeders and all that. So now this is, for me, this is the fun part. So yeah, so that's basically where I'm at right now. I had some extra Sculpting mold, so what I did is I just started kind of like expanding or covering the stuff that I had done here. So I covered this with pink foam here all the way through, but this is all the Sculpting mold that was left, so I just kind of smoothed out the hill. I also kind of painted around the street so it looks more like a street instead of just, you know, a piece of masonite there. Like I said, there's going to be trees here. I've shown this before. For at least from here back all the way through and all the way up to there. So, you know, you won't see this. You won't see the road disappearing in the back there. Yeah, so that's it. I'm going to leave it right there, and I will see you on number 11. Thanks for watching.